Excuse me, do you happen to know your way to the welfare office? It's 3 city blocks further down. Brad Mitchell's voice sliced through the crisp atmosphere of First National Bank's polished marble lobby with an almost surgical precision. He looked up from his position behind the teller counter, his customary smirk, honed by years of practice, effortlessly gliding past the impeccably tailored suit of the black woman who had just approached. Keisha Thompson paused for a mere half-beat, not from any sense of apprehension, but from the weary recognition of a long-standing hurt. Above them, the digital clock positioned above the row of tellers indicated 12:30 in the afternoon. Nearby the entrance, a gleaming brass plaque proudly announced an executive committee meeting scheduled for 1:15 in the afternoon, while another internal notice declared the branch would be closed for lunch, starting at 1200 in the afternoon. The passage of time, marked by the ticking of unseen seconds, seemed to drop into the marble-clad expanse like an invisible metronome. Brad ensured his voice resonated throughout the entire lobby. This is a private financial institution, not a place for quick cash transactions. Individuals like yourself frequently present counterfeit checks or attempt some sort of fraudulent activity. He gestured dismissively towards the exit with his chin, as if shooing away an errant stray animal. There are ATMs located outside if you possess an EBT card. Camera phones began to click. A well-dressed Caucasian woman murmured, "We should really inform security." In a nearby corner, an elderly black gentleman shook his head, the weariness evident on his face betraying someone who had witnessed this distressing scenario far too many times. Maya Adams, a freelance journalist, stood directly behind Keisha, subtly angling her mobile device to maintain discretion. She initiated a live broadcast on Instagram, stating, "Banking discrimination is happening right now. First National, downtown." The viewer count, initially in the dozens, rapidly surged into the hundreds. The comments section became flooded with phrases like, "banking while black." Keisha calmly placed a withdrawal slip on the stone counter, her voice remarkably even, stating, "I would like to withdraw $25,000 from my account." Brad erupted in laughter. 25 grand? That's more than most people earn in an entire year. What kind of charade are you attempting? He snatched the slip from the counter and lightly crumpled it as if it were mere refuse. "Allow me to venture a guess. You're about to claim you own a business or hold some directorial position, aren't you? Everyone professes the same." Susan Clark, the branch supervisor, emerged from her glass-enclosed office. The rhythmic click of her heels provided a steady beat as her eyes scanned the room, eventually fixing on Keisha as if she were a problematic anomaly. "What appears to be the issue, Brad?" she inquired, her tone suggesting a perfunctory inquiry, her body already angled towards her subordinate. "This individual is attempting to withdraw a suspicious sum. She claims to have an account here." Susan's eyebrow arched. "Indeed. That is unusual, ma'am. May I please see your identification? For significant amounts, we do require verification of employment." Keisha produced her driver's license and a platinum First National card, her name elegantly embossed on its surface. Brad glanced at them, a sneer twisting his lips. "Counterfeit identification is quite sophisticated these days. The cards are no different. They're manufactured to appear authentic." He held the card aloft, as if it were damning evidence. His words not only contested the legitimacy of the documents, but also implicitly denied Keisha's very right to occupy that space. Jerome Brooks, a security veteran of 10 years, materialized from the rear of the bank. His stance conveyed an awareness of the unfolding situation, yet his uniform dictated his role as an enforcer. Susan spoke at a volume sufficient to be heard throughout the lobby. "Jerome, we may require your assistance. Possible fraud attempt." The atmosphere in the lobby began to divide, with some patrons nodding in agreement with the cautionary stance of security, while others frowned, sensing the palpable stench of prejudice. Keisha's phone buzzed. A Federal Reserve conference call was scheduled for 2 in the morning. She silenced it with a subtle gesture that did not go unnoticed by many eyes. Maya's live stream frame tightened, bringing viewers closer, allowing them to even hear Keisha's breathing. The viewer numbers continued to climb. 847, 1,200, 2,000. Comments flooded the screen. Disgusting. Call the press. Which branch is this? Susan edged closer to the counter, her voice chillingly cold. We have stringent protocols for large withdrawals, particularly concerning certain types of accounts. The implication hung in the air like a toxic vapor. Certain types clearly referred to more than just account classifications. Maya's lens captured the conspiratorial glance exchanged between Susan and Brad, their posture forming an impenetrable barrier against the customer. Kindly wait in the designated seating area, near security, while we conduct our verification. This process could take several hours, Susan stated, her words couched in polite language but infused with an undercurrent of humiliation. This maneuver effectively positioned Keisha as a suspect, pushing her out of the line to allow other perceived real customers to proceed unimpeded. Brad's keys clattered on his keyboard. The system has flagged anomalies. Red flags necessitate a thorough review. This was an outright fabrication, but in the absence of immediate challenge, it held the potential to solidify into administrative truth. At the adjacent counter, a Caucasian man successfully withdrew $20,000. A simple swipe, a signature, and the transaction was complete. No inquiries were made regarding his income, the source of his funds, or his intended purpose. The public address system crackled to life. Executive meeting in 45 minutes. The air grew perceptibly heavier. Susan glanced at her watch, but maintained her position at the counter. Maya scanned the incoming comments. Civil rights attorneys and prominent figures in the financial sector were now joining the discussion. The live stream experienced a significant surge in viewership as new customers entered the bank, immediately raising their phones. The lobby transformed into a makeshift public courtroom. Keisha's words landed with a deliberate slowness, each syllable carefully measured. I have been banking here for 6 years. My account number is clearly indicated on my card and identification. I wish to withdraw my funds. Within this carefully constructed linguistic trap, any expression of anger would undoubtedly be categorized as aggressive, while a display of calm would be interpreted as dangerously confident. She opted for a controlled silence, allowing the omnipresent cameras to serve as her voice. A businessman muttered, if she has proper identification, they should disperse the funds. A middle-aged woman countered, one must exercise caution these days. People are prone to exploitation. Neither statement was entirely neutral. Each inadvertently fanned the flames of existing prejudice. Executive meeting in 30 minutes. Viewer count, 3,400, 5,200. Maya's camera captured Jerome casting a furtive glance downwards, a clear expression of shame for the system he served. That singular moment represented the human fracture within the cold, unfeeling machinery of the bank. Keisha stood tall, her leather portfolio closed before her. Within its confines lay crucial board meeting documents, various contracts, and items that possessed the potential to significantly alter the landscape of the banking industry. However, to Brad, she was merely an individual of the wrong ethnicity occupying the wrong space. And such perceived transgressions, ingrained in his habitual behavior, necessitated adherence to established procedures for rectification. As Maya zoomed in on Keisha's resolute expression, viewers began placing bets in the comments section. She's holding an ace, one read. Observe her composure. This won't conclude at the teller's station. The bank lobby descended into an eerie hush, as if the entire room collectively held its breath. The imposing shadow of the executive elevator slid across the frosted glass partition. A critical juncture in the mounting tension was imminent, and at the very epicenter of this brewing storm, Keisha placed her hand on her portfolio, still closed, much like a commander poised to activate a switch that would alter the entire field of play. The executive elevator doors slid open, revealing David Parker, the regional manager, striding out with purpose, clad in a dark suit, his tie perfectly straight. What exactly is transpiring here? His gaze swept across the scene. A black woman at the counter, a gathering crowd, and dozens of mobile phones actively recording. Within his mind, alarm bells were already sounding with urgency. Susan leaned in, her voice pitched low, deliberately excluding Keisha from the exchange. Suspected fraudulent activity, attempting to withdraw $25,000 with questionable documentation. Brad flagged several red alerts in the system. David nodded, a gesture suggesting he had navigated similar situations countless times. He then turned, adopting a polished public relations demeanor. "Ma'am, I am David Parker, the regional manager. It appears there has been some miscommunication regarding our verification procedures." Keisha remained composed. "There is no confusion. I am withdrawing my own funds." David abruptly raised his voice, addressing the entire lobby rather than directly engaging her. "Sophisticated schemes are increasingly prevalent. Identity theft, falsified documents, social engineering tactics. We must exercise extreme caution." Jerome stepped forward slightly, speaking in a hushed tone. "Perhaps we could adjourn to a private room to discuss this matter and avoid further commotion." David deliberately shook his head, ensuring his actions were loud enough to be captured by the phone microphones. "No. Investigations into potential fraud must be conducted with complete transparency. Other customers need to witness our commitment to taking these matters seriously." And with that, the primary stage was unequivocally set in the very heart of the lobby, serving as both a deterrent and a pointed message. Individuals such as yourself should be mindful of their designated place. Maya subtly glanced at the stream of comments. "Public discrimination. Call the NOACP. Tag FDIC OCC Fed." Viewer numbers escalated from 7,800 to 10,000. The mounting online pressure now exerted a counterforce against the on-site assertion of authority. Yet David maintained firm control of the narrative. He placed a substantial folder on the counter, the very apparatus of the institutional system. "We require verification of employment, the source of your funds, a written statement detailing the purpose of the withdrawal, potentially tax returns, and your social security number. Standard procedure." Each requested item felt like a drill bit piercing her privacy, conveying an implicit message: "We do not trust you." Meanwhile, at the adjacent counter, another customer concluded a substantial transaction in a mere 3 minutes, with no questions posed regarding the purpose, source, or employment status of the funds. Brad interjected, "I will run it through our fraud detection system to ascertain if any suspicious patterns emerge." In reality, this was a calculated stalling tactic, cleverly disguised with technical and official-sounding jargon. The technological system was weaponized as a shield, allowing individuals to retreat behind its perceived impartiality. The public address system crackled once more. "Executive meeting in 20 minutes. Susan frowned, feeling the pressure to prepare for her upcoming meeting, yet she remained rooted at the counter, acting as an unyielding gatekeeper. Her voice, steady and composed, declared, "Our policies are applied uniformly to all patrons." The instant these words left her lips, Maya expertly panned her camera to capture 2 Caucasian customers seamlessly completing their own transactions without any delay. This visual juxtaposition starkly contradicted Susan's pronouncement. A group of young professionals entered the bank, immediately retrieving their mobile devices. A black woman in her 30s posed a direct question: "Are you subjecting this customer to harassment solely because of her race? It is currently the year 2025, not 1964. Susan responded curtly, "Kindly refrain from interfering with security procedures." The word "procedures" was repeatedly invoked, functioning as a shield to deflect any accusations of impropriety. Keisha's phone buzzed incessantly. Her assistant was reminding her of the impending 2 a.m. conference call with the Federal Reserve, and her lawyer was texting, "I'm observing the live stream. Would you like me to come to the bank?" Keisha offered no immediate response, maintaining her steady breathing and her unwavering gaze. Maya zoomed in on Keisha, capturing the unyielding composure of a woman poised and unbowed. "We will require you to take a seat and await our assistance," David stated formally. "This process could potentially extend for several hours." The choice before Keisha was stark: endure further humiliation to access a fundamental financial service, or retreat and forfeit her own funds. Jerome averted his gaze from Keisha's, a visible conflict playing out on his face. He was caught between his directives and his conscience. Viewer numbers climbed to 12,400, then 15,000. Names of major news organizations began appearing in the comments. The link to the live stream was embedded on multiple news websites. Upstairs, the corporate headquarters issued a social crisis alert, and the legal department initiated the collection of all relevant footage. David received an internal call, his expression momentarily betraying a flicker of concern before he resolutely resumed his assigned role. He produced another stack of official forms. "Kindly affix your signature here, here, and here, granting us authorization to contact your employer." He then posed the pivotal question: "Where is your place of employment?" In David's limited worldview, the only acceptable answer was nowhere of significance. The concept that this woman might, in fact, possess considerable wealth had never entered his calculations. Keisha responded with quiet simplicity: "I am self-employed." Brad smirked. "Self-employed? Ah, yes, likely a consultant or involved in a startup, correct? Unable to substantiate your income." These barbs were merely a thinly veiled attempt to mask the underlying prejudice. The fundamental truth was, they had no inclination to release the funds to someone of her perceived background. The public address system announced again, "Executive meeting in 15 minutes. A palpable ripple of urgency passed through the assembled crowd. An older customer approached, displaying visible irritation. "I need to make a deposit before closing for lunch." Brad waved him away dismissively. "Security situation." He then turned to the gathered crowd, gesturing pointedly at Keisha. "She is attempting to withdraw a substantial sum using questionable paperwork." The woman hesitated, casting a suspicious glance at Keisha, a suspicion that had just been instilled in her. "Please present the policy that mandates this level of verification," the young black woman stated again. "I have personally withdrawn more without any scrutiny." Susan clutched the straps of her bag tightly. "The policy applies universally." However, the stark contrast was now undeniable. Effortless and swift transactions on one side, a bureaucratic gauntlet of paperwork on the other. Maya, noticing her device's battery level dropping precariously, connected a portable power bank. She observed the surge in audience engagement, comments flying across the screen. "This is a real-time case study," one read. "Tag your elected officials. Get their faces on camera." This narrative had transcended the story of a single individual. It had become a potent form of social evidence. The PA system announced, "Executive meeting in 10 minutes." The announcement sounded remarkably like a starting pistol, signaling the commencement of the next critical phase. The camera lens swung back to Keisha. She placed both hands firmly on her leather portfolio. The crowd unconsciously leaned forward. Maya zoomed in on Keisha's eyes. Gone was the look of someone passively requesting a service. It was now the unwavering gaze of someone about to dictate the final outcome. "You are attempting to pressure us with a live broadcast," Brad declared, trying to regain a semblance of control, his voice betraying a sliver of its former arrogance. "Video evidence can be subject to misinterpretation." Keisha remained silent. A breath passed. Then, with a decisive click, The portfolio opened. Visible within its depths was the edge of a substantial stack of papers, a metallic business card case, and two pristine cards with silver edges that caught the glittering light of the chandelier. Maya held her breath. The viewer count leaped from 18,000 to 22,000. Jerome subtly lifted his chin, reminiscent of a soldier receiving orders from a new commander. Kesha reached into the case and withdrew a single business card, placing it directly in front of Brad Mitchell. The embossed lettering gleamed under the chandelier's illumination. Kesha Thompson, President and Chief Executive Officer, Thompson Financial Group. Brad smirked. Fake business cards cost about $5 a dozen. David Parker, however, did not share his mirth. He leaned in closer, examining the font, the quality of the cardstock, the micro-embossing, all unmistakably indicative of high-level corporate briefing materials. Kesha then produced a second card, the First National Bank logo, accompanied by fine print legally stating Board of Directors, Preferred Shareholder, Series A, Voting Rights. David's face visibly paled. He stammered, You are on the board?" Kesha's gaze was direct, her voice low yet sharp. "I do not merely sit on the board, Mr. Parker. Thompson Financial Group, or TFG, holds 31% of First National Corporation, making us its single largest shareholder." The ambient sound in the lobby seemed to completely dissipate. Brad's fingers loosened, and the card slipped from his grasp. Susan Clark took a half-step backward, as if the counter itself had become searingly hot. On Maya Adams' screen, the viewer count skyrocketed from 15,600 to 28,400 within a mere 30 seconds. Comments exploded. "What a plot twist! She owns the bank. This is history!" Jerome Brooks stood frozen, memories rushing back of internal bulletins and annual report photographs. Yes, that face undeniably belonged to her. 40 minutes prior, he had been compelled to serve as a physical barrier. Now, he was witnessing a dramatic reversal of the established power dynamic. Kesha fully opened the portfolio, revealing an acquisition agreement dated 8 months prior, alongside the quarterly meeting agenda presented in bold typeface. She nodded towards the sign indicating the executive committee meeting, 1:15 p.m. Today's executive meeting is the quarterly review with the controlling shareholder. The silence within the lobby shifted its quality, transforming from that of a courtroom to that of a lecture hall where the most astronomically expensive customer service miscalculation imaginable was now being broadcast live. Kesha's tone adopted a legalistic inflection. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act, or ECOA, permits fines of up to $500,000 per violation. The Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA, mandates equitable service to all communities. TFG's Compliance Division has standing orders to report any suspected instances of bias immediately. She raised her phone, displaying contact information for relevant agencies. Senator Elizabeth Warren's office is actively monitoring Maya's live stream. The House Financial Services Committee has been duly informed. Brad's mouth opened and then snapped shut. He had never conceived that the meticulously followed lines of procedure could lead him before senators and House committees. Susan immediately shifted into damage control mode. "Perhaps we could discuss this in private." Kesha interrupted her, her gaze still fixed on Maya's camera. "This ceased to be an internal matter 40 minutes ago when you threatened to involve federal authorities concerning a shareholder." The live stream captured the entirety of that exchange. The next strike aimed directly at the market. Kesha opened a financial application on her phone. First National's stock is currently down 4.2% in after-hours trading. That translates to approximately $340 million in market capitalization erased. She swiped to a contact list. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, asset managers collectively overseeing $3 trillion, are closely observing tonight's response as an environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, stress test. From a strategic perspective, this constituted a dual vice: regulation tightening from one flank and financial leverage from the other. When the cost associated with prejudice escalates, a simple "sorry" is no longer a cost-effective solution. Maya's lens captured David Parker, gripping his radio tightly. Code red: all conference room managers, immediately. However, the wave of consequences had already breached the confines of the building. Major news organization homepages flashed breaking news alerts. First National's name had instantaneously transformed into a nationwide crisis keyword. "We can rectify this situation," David began. Keisha's expression remained impassive. "I did not come here to create a scene. My objective was to assess one specific element: frontline institutional bias. Today, you have provided an exemplary data set." She produced a packet labeled Customer Experience Assessment, Confidential Board Review. Brad attempted a desperate maneuver. "I was merely adhering to established procedure. I was not engaging in discrimination." Keisha's response cut through his defense like a sharp blade. "Kindly direct me to the specific procedure that sanctions racial profiling. Please point out the section within your training manual that instructs you to regard every black customer as a suspect." Silence was the only reply, as no such procedure or manual section existed. Maya read aloud from the scrolling comments. "Lawyer here. We can sue under ECOA. Investor here. ESG sell-off is imminent. Revoke their bonuses immediately." The online audience was no longer merely expressing anger. They were actively prescribing remedies. Keisha slowly raised her gaze, her demeanor akin to that of a judge delivering a verdict. "I am presenting an ultimatum. 5 fundamental pillars of reform, with a strict 24-hour deadline. Agree to these terms, and we shall continue our partnership. Refuse, and TFG will divest immediately, with other ESG funds following suit. The opportunity cost for your institution will be incalculable." The lobby held its breath. Jerome straightened his posture, stating, "The right course of action has finally found its voice." At the focal point of the frame, Keisha folded the portfolio to a more manageable size, placing 5 meticulously bullet-pointed demands on the stone counter, poised to launch her next strategic maneuver. These demands were precise and utterly impossible to misinterpret. Before she could articulate them, the elevator dinged. Robert Sterling, the chief executive officer of First National, emerged rapidly, his tie askew. His gaze swept across the scene, taking in the 2 business cards resting on the counter before rising to meet Keisha, the controlling shareholder, in person. "Miss Thompson, I assure you, this incident does not reflect First National's core values." Keisha did not raise her voice. She simply flipped open the initial page of an audit report and placed it on the counter. 47 discrimination complaints filed within the last 6 months. 78% involve customers of color. 63% are concentrated in branches exhibiting supervisory patterns identical to those observed today. Every potential avenue for official recourse had now been systematically closed off. Robert Sterling was still visibly struggling to process the information when Keisha laid out the framework for reform, arranging it like chess pieces on a board. She spoke with crystalline clarity, ticking off 5 fingers. Pillar 1. Immediate personal accountability. Terminate those directly responsible for and complicit in today's events. Brad Mitchell, for gross violation of conduct standards. Susan Clark, the supervisor who enabled such actions, and a comprehensive review of David Parker, the regional manager who orchestrated this investigation. Initiate a retroactive probe into past conduct at related branches. Estimated cost, $200,000. All terminations must adhere to legal protocols. No reassignments disguised as internal transfers will be accepted. Pillar 2, Certified Bias Training. Implement 40 hours of bias recognition training for all frontline staff with annual recertification. Modules will encompass federal law, ECOA, de-escalation techniques, evidentiary standards, and peer oversight. Budget allocation, $12 million within 60 days. Key performance indicator, a 95% completion rate within the specified time frame with anonymous post-course evaluations. Pillar 3, real-time artificial intelligence bias monitoring. Develop a system to analyze language used at counters and in call centers, flagging discriminatory patterns, keywords, tone, and disproportionate demands for documentation, alerting supervisors within 60 seconds. Red flags will trigger a temporary transaction pause for review. Development cost, $45 million. Annual maintenance, $8 million. Data architecture will be employed to ensure privacy compliance, anonymization, and audit logs. Pillar 4, independent civil rights ombudsman. Appoint a civil rights ombudsman who will report directly to the board, possessing full investigative authority, access to data, the power to recommend terminations, and a mandate to rectify operational processes. Budget for a 5-year period, including investigative team, complaint resolution service level agreements of 15 days, and quarterly public reporting. Pillar 5, community fund. Establish a fund to provide favorable loans to minority-owned businesses and expand financial education initiatives in underserved areas, measuring impact against ESG standards. This is not a public relations exercise, it is responsible reinvestment. She concluded her statement, placing her pen on the file with the finality of a period marking the end of a sentence. The deadline is 24 hours, 8 a.m. tomorrow. The TFG board will convene to assess your submission. Acceptance will ensure stability. Rejection means TFG will divest $1.22 billion, which will likely trigger subsequent ESG fund divestments totaling an estimated $3.888 to $8 billion, followed by credit rating evaluations and thorough executive oversight. David Parker began to remark, "We will require additional time." However, the clock mounted above had already advanced to 10:05 post-meridian. The public address system announced, "An executive meeting is scheduled in 10 minutes." Time was no longer a reprieve. It had become the instrument of their downfall. Brad recoiled, resorting to the familiar plea of the cornered individual. "I have 2 children and a mortgage," he stated. Kesha's gaze remained fixed upon him, her words, though not overtly aggressive, effectively closing off every avenue of escape. "What regulation permits you to classify someone as a suspect solely based on their complexion? If it's not documented, then your so-called procedure is merely a detrimental habit ingrained in your uniform." Susan interjected, clinging to the defense. "We applied the identical criteria to everyone." Maya shifted her focus to the adjacent counter. Another significant financial transaction had been processed in merely 3 minutes. This observation shattered the prevailing narrative. Jerome raised his head. "Miss Thompson," he began, "I wish to express my apologies for my involvement. I ought to have—" Keisha offered a subtle shake of her head. "You were placed in a difficult situation. Your integrity in this instance is recognized." In that pivotal moment, a human being was restored from the impersonal machinery. Robert Sterling drew a profound breath. "Firstly, First National acknowledges its responsibility, but we require a tangible plan." Kesha presented a key performance indicator chart. Training completion rate, 95% within 60 days. Post-course competency score, 455. AI monitoring pilot implementation within 30 days across 25 high-risk branches. Full deployment within 120 days. False positive rate, 5% after 90 days. Ombudsman charter approval within 14 days. Quarterly public reporting. Community fund, 30% dispersed in the first quarter of deployment. 20% access increase in underserved regions. Discrimination complaints, 30% reduction within 6 months, verified by an independent third-party tool. Data transparency is paramount. Kesha stated, "If it is not quantified, it is not managed. If it is not made public, no one will be convinced." On the ticker display, breaking news scrolled. First National under scrutiny for alleged discrimination. Shareholder confrontation broadcast live. The bank's public relations team sent a notification to Sterling's phone. Media outlets demanding interviews, statement required within 30 minutes. He understood. Mere words would be insufficient. Tangible, measurable actions were necessary. David cast a subdued, imploring look. Susan tightened her grip on her bag straps until her knuckles turned white. Brad stood immobile, a defective effigy. Within Maya's frame, the tableau bore the resemblance of a curated photographic exhibit. Corporate bias in the digital epoch. At its core stood Keisha, dictating the terms without raising her voice. A coded message flashed. All managers to the conference room. David's voice, though slightly off-key, conveyed the shift in authority. The conference room was no longer the locus of directive power. The teller counter had now become the site where agreements would be formalized. Keisha closed the portfolio, leaving only 2 business cards and the stark ultimatum. I will return at 2:30 post-meridia following my discussion with the Federal Reserve. By that time, I anticipate a signed acceptance in its entirety, accompanied by a deployment schedule. Sterling offered a nod, a gesture of resigned acceptance. We will proceed with preparations immediately. This was no longer a matter of public relations. It was a strategic commitment to survival. The critical insights from the initial 2 acts were now evident. Personal bias had become institutionalized through procedural language and staged transparency. The dual leverage of legal and market forces had inverted the balance of power, transforming apologies into KPI-driven, budget-constrained, deadline-oriented reforms. Digital public scrutiny, live broadcasts, social media hashtags, and embedded media coverage had effectively become society's defense mechanism. When collective attention is focused, the cost of corporate malfeasance escalates dramatically. Kesha turned away from the counter. Jerome held the door open for her, a subtle gesture laden with respect. Behind them, Brad, Susan, and David remained, representing 3 distinct strata of the organizational hierarchy: frontline prejudice, supervisory complicity, and managerial artifice. Maya's camera followed Keisha's receding figure until the door closed, then panned to the sign indicating Executive Committee Meeting, 1:15 post-meridiam, serving as a prelude to the subsequent chapter. The next phase would encompass the emergency assembly, the formal endorsement of the Thompson stipulations, the immediate repercussions for personnel, and the transformation of the ultimatum into a practical implementation strategy. The glass doors of the executive conference room sealed shut precisely at 1:15 post-meridiam. Inside, the lengthy walnut table stretched out like a runway. Robert Sterling stood at its head, his hands gripping the edges of his chair as if anchoring himself against a tilting earth. The wall-mounted screens displayed 3 concurrent feeds: Maya Adams' live stream, the after-hours stock price graph, and a rapidly scrolling aggregation of negative public comments, resembling a digital sandstorm. "Let us commence," Sterling stated. Mark Ellis, the general counsel, adjusted his spectacles and initiated the slide presentation. Environmental, Community, and Opportunity Act, Community Reinvestment Act, Potential Federal Investigation, Class Action Lawsuit Exposure. Recommendation: acknowledge and rectify immediately. Do not contest the facts captured on video. Chief Financial Officer Linda Price followed, presenting a cost comparison. Thompson Standards package estimated at $67 million in year 1 versus $3.88 billion in lost capital, credit downgrades, and multi-year brand damage. The economic rationale is unequivocally clear. Chief Risk Officer Janet Wade pointed to a chart. We are in territory of systemic risk. Legal, operational, market, and reputational vectors are converging. Every moment of delay exacerbates the projected cost. Human Resources Director Olivia Reed opened a file. I have reviewed the disciplinary records. Brad Mitchell, 34 complaints over 7 years, a pattern of appending supplementary documentation for customers of color, predominantly dismissed as security precautions. Susan Clark, multiple instances of disregarding staff bias reports, citing policy adherence. David Parker, orchestrated public investigation, rejected the guard's offer of a private consultation room. Sterling turned to David. Your turn. David attempted to regain his composure. I misjudged the situation. I believed that transparency in the presence of customers was the prevailing standard. I inadvertently transformed it into public humiliation. His words landed heavily on the table, remaining unaddressed. No one offered disagreement. No one intervened to assist him. The solution is straightforward, Sterling declared flatly. Mark enumerated the necessary steps on his fingers. 1. Formal written acceptance of the ultimatum. 2. Immediate termination of Brad. Suspension of Susan, with a recommendation for termination following an expedited review. Request David's resignation to mitigate complications. 3. Notification to investors regarding the implementation plan. 4. Emergency Board of Directors meeting at 8 ante-meridiem to approve the budget and the Ombudsman Charter. 5. Extend an offer to Dr. Angela Davis, a former Department of Justice attorney, to serve as the Civil Rights Ombudsman. 6. Promote Jerome Brooks to Acting Director of Compliance and Customer Rights, as his integrity has already been established. Linda, referencing her spreadsheet, added, I can authorize immediate fund release from reserves and reallocate capital expenditures this quarter. Remaining funds will be diverted from marketing to the community fund and training initiatives. The Chief Technology Officer, joining via video conference, stated, regarding AI monitoring, we can expedite the request for proposals with 2 vendors, initiating a pilot program in 25 high-traffic branches within 30 days. Integration into the customer relationship management system for real-time flagging is feasible. Sterling glanced at the clock. 1:32 post-meridiem, the live stream. Public Relations Chief Nina Cole responded, the media requires interviews within 30 minutes. I strongly advise against any statement without concrete actions. Our plan is to publish an open letter on the website, commit to the key performance indicators and timeline, and schedule a 5 post-meridiem press conference subsequent to the signing with TFG. Proceed, Sterling commanded. The atmosphere within the room shifted with the efficiency of an engine room changing operational speed. Human Resources commenced printing Brad's termination notice and Susan's suspension documentation. Mark meticulously drafted the 5-point acceptance, appending Keisha's KPI table. Linda initialed the budget reallocation directives. The CTO prepared a condensed request for proposal for the AI system. Nina began constructing the landing page for the inclusion and accountability roadmap. 1:50 post-meridiem. Sterling directed his gaze at David. David inclined his head, as if anticipating his sentence. I will submit my resignation following this meeting. There was no applause, but the tension in the air perceptibly lessened. One impediment had voluntarily removed itself. The scene transitioned to the corridor outside. Maya filmed the frosted glass doors, providing narration for her viewers. They are currently deliberating the future of an entire financial institution. We will substantiate these developments with official documentation, not mere rhetoric. The viewer count surged to 36,000. Comments began to scroll rapidly. Do not allow them to operate in secrecy. Demand a public timeline. 2:05, post-meridiem. Keisha was seated in the lounge, her headset connected to the Federal Reserve call. With a composed tone, she articulated her framework for economic justice. When the cost of capital necessitates behavioral modification, reform progresses more rapidly than litigation. The voice on the other end inquired, will TFG coordinate data for an industry-wide monitoring pilot? Keisha replied, "We prioritize individual privacy, but we are amenable to sharing aggregated metrics." 2:27 post-meridiem. The doors to the conference room opened. Sterling and the legal team emerged, appearing strained yet composed. Mark handed Keisha a sheaf of documents. First National formally accepts all 5 stipulations, including the key performance indicators and budget allocations. Board approval is scheduled for 8 ante-meridiem tomorrow. Today, we will initiate all items not requiring a vote. Keisha perused the pages with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to extensive legal briefs. The final page detailed the upcoming deadlines. Beta deployment within 30 days. Full operational rollout within 120 days. Ombudsman charter finalization within 14 days. Mandatory 40-hour training with a 95% completion rate within 60 days. A 30% reduction in complaints within 6 months. 25% of the community fund to be disbursed in the first quarter. She nodded thoughtfully. Kindly add provisions for quarterly public reports, third-party validation of key performance indicators, mandatory transaction suspension upon Level 1 EAI flags, and ensure the document is updated and signed. Mark made the necessary amendments immediately and reprinted the documents. Sterling affixed his signature. Keisha signed, acknowledging receipt and noting the details. The whirring of the printer became the rhythmic pulse of the modern era. Action preceded pronouncements. From an analytical perspective, this marked the critical phase shift, the transition from apology to a reform contract. The art of crisis management here resided not in polished statements, but in verifiable metrics, defined timelines, independent oversight, and interim enforcement measures. Processes that had previously been weaponized were now being reconfigured into a system for customer protection. 2:40 post-meridiem. Olivia received confirmation that Brad had been escorted from the premises, his access credentials deactivated. Susan was suspended pending an expedited investigation, accompanied by a corporate-level violation notice. David submitted his resignation via email, with all executive personnel copied. Nina launched the Inclusion and Accountability webpage, detailing commitments and key performance indicators. No embellishments, only the work that lay ahead. On Maya's screen, a banner appeared. First National commits to Thompson standards. A comment followed. "We will not believe it until we see the budget allocation." Linda, the chief financial officer, immediately posted a detailed breakdown of the $67 million first-year expenditure. 2:55 post-meridiem. Keisha closed the portfolio. The 5 post-meridiem press conference. She instructed, "Do not speak. Project the signed agreement, the budget, the timeline, and the responsible parties. Ensure Jerome Brooks is present alongside you for the transparency-related question and answer session." She emphasized, "The public needs to see who has been empowered." Sterling nodded. This time, it was an agreement, not a capitulation. As Keisha departed, Jerome waited at the door. He whispered, "Thank you for articulating what I have observed, but could not express." Keisha offered a smile. "Commencing tomorrow, your objective is to empower others to voice concerns before situations escalate, and you will possess the authority to ensure these actions are upheld." The marble lobby gradually resumed its murmur of footsteps and hushed conversations, but the building's power dynamics had irrevocably shifted. By 5 post-meridiem, as the press lights intensified, the world would not hear an apology. It would witness a meticulously crafted blueprint. Adek Jam. The following morning, the First National Board of Directors convened for an emergency session. Robert Sterling's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he began. "We formally accept the Thompson standards in their entirety." There was no dissenting opinion. The vote was unanimous. The gavel's impact resonated once, akin to driving a stake into virgin soil. Olivia, from Human Resources, provided the initial report. Brad Mitchell has been terminated, effective immediately, with his violation file forwarded to the Ombudsman for a comprehensive pattern review. Susan Clark's employment contract has been terminated due to negligent supervision and enabling discriminatory practices. David Parker has resigned. His file has also been sent to the Ombudsman for cross-branch examination. A profound silence settled over the room. Personal accountability now had specific individuals, dates, and signed confirmations attached. Nina, representing public relations, shared the outcomes of the 5 post-Meridium press conference. Initial public reception has been cautiously optimistic, primarily because we presented concrete documentation, budgetary details, timelines, and key performance indicators. The media is characterizing it as verified action, not a mere apology. Linda, the chief financial officer, added, "The stock has shown a significant recovery, closing above yesterday's peak. ESG funds have indicated they will maintain their positions, with some potentially increasing their holdings if we meet our 90-day performance benchmarks." The chief technology officer presented the AI monitoring framework, confirming the signed agreements with 2 vendors. A pilot program is set to launch across 25 high-risk branches in 4 states. Integration includes call audio and teller camera feeds. Audio data will be anonymized in compliance with legal statutes. A real-time alert dashboard with 3 distinct tiers has been established. Tier 1, immediate transaction halt and supervisor notification. Tier 2, Ombudsman involvement. Tier 3, case closure and investigation initiated within 24 hours. The door opened. Kesha Thompson entered and assumed her seat, a right she held as a controlling shareholder. "Let us begin with personnel," she stated. "On the front line, who embodies these new values?" Olivia smiled. "Jerome Brooks." The rear door opened, revealing Jerome, who yesterday had been a security guard, now sporting a new identification badge. Director of Compliance and Customer Advocacy. A smattering of applause began, gradually growing into a full ovation. Maya Adams, seated in the back row, filmed the moment, a tangible symbol of power being rightfully positioned. Sterling introduced Maya. "As of today, Maya will join us as Director of Transparency Communications, External. Her responsibilities will include publishing quarterly KPI progress reports, maintaining a dedicated hotline for customer experience feedback, and coordinating with the Ombudsman." Maya nodded, a smile reflecting both her joy and the gravity of her new role. "Transparency is not for aesthetic appeal. It is essential for maintaining control." Mark, the legal counsel, moved to the Ombudsman framework. "We have successfully engaged Dr. Angela Davis, a former Department of Justice attorney, and she has formally accepted the position. The Ombudsman Charter will report directly to the board, granting full data access. She will have the authority to recommend disciplinary actions, including terminations and policy revisions. A 15-day service level agreement will be applied to each complaint. Quarterly public bulletins will be issued, and whistleblower protections will be firmly established." The board voted unanimously in favor of the proposal. Linda, the chief financial officer, displayed the budget for the $67 million first-year allocation, clearly itemized. $12 million for AI monitoring and development plus integration, $8 million annually for maintenance, $5 million for the Ombudsman and investigative team, $25 million for the community fund, ring-fenced from operational contingencies, and transparency communications. Kesha tapped her pen lightly on the table. 90-day key performance indicators. Janet, the risk officer, responded. Training completion, 70% average score, 4.25. AI alerts operational in 25 branches with a projected 10% false positive rate. She continued. Ombudsman fully chartered. First quarterly public bulletin issued. 15% reduction in bias complaints compared to the 6-month baseline. 180-day key performance indicators, 95% training completion, 30% complaint reduction, 5% false positives, 30% community fund disbursement, and 3 public case studies of successful remediation. The meeting shifted its focus to the specifics of deployment. In Tulsa, a teller logged into the unconscious bias e-learning module. In Boston, a supervisor revised forms to eliminate superfluous fields for purpose of withdrawal. In Atlanta, engineers were integrating APIs to capture real-time linguistic data for the AI system. Maya directed her camera towards these subtle but significant actions, observing not just promises, but concrete proof. On day 3, the dashboard triggered a Level 1 alert at a specific branch. A teller had used the phrase, "unusually large amount," when addressing a customer of color who was withdrawing funds. The supervisor intervened promptly, reassigned the transaction, offered an apology, and completed the withdrawal within 4 minutes. The ombudsman logged the incident, transforming a minor procedural misstep into a valuable learning opportunity for the entire network. This was the initial indication that the system was actively functioning. In parallel, the 25 Anor Community Fund began accepting applications from minority-owned businesses, offering preferential loan rates, complimentary financial advisory services, and credit education workshops in underserved communities. Maya interviewed an auto shop owner in Detroit. "I had been denied loans 3 times due to a weak financial history. Today, they guided me through the process of developing a cash flow plan. It's the first time I've felt a door open for me." Regulators issued a letter, positively acknowledging the swift response and inviting Keisha to testify on the economic justice model. The FDIC, OCC, and Federal Reserve proposed adopting First National's key performance indicators as an industry benchmark. On the market, FNC stock not only recovered, but experienced an upward trend as investors re-evaluated the company based on reduced governance risk and improved environmental, social, and governance standing. From an analytical standpoint, the Thompson standards had progressed from an ultimatum to a contractual agreement and ultimately to execution. Its 3 foundational pillars, quantification and defined timelines, key performance indicators, and public disclosure to counter empty apologies, and independent authority with the ombudsman and AI triggering transaction halts to counteract procedural capture, along with resource reallocation through the community fund to counter public relations-driven ethics, had proven transformative. Concluding the session, Sterling surveyed the room, speaking deliberately. "Yesterday we faced a costly lesson. Today we are paying that cost in full through decisive action." He turned to Keisha. "Thank you for compelling us to mature." Keisha replied, "This is not a lecture, it is structural design. The objective is to ensure your customers never again have to resort to live streaming to receive respectful treatment." As individuals began to rise, Jerome paused at the doorway, casting a glance toward the marble lobby where this entire process had commenced. He adjusted his new name badge and exhaled slowly. Beyond those doors, the teller counters remained unchanged, the marble still gleamed. However, within the very fabric of the institution, new pathways had been established: measurement, accountability, and respect. Most importantly, the door stood ready for the next person to enter, carrying their inherent dignity. 7:58 Antimeridiem, Houston Branch, Monday morning. At teller station number 3, the login screen had barely illuminated when the dashboard displayed a gray notification bubble. AI monitoring ready. Latency 100%. Young teller Aiden Ross took a deep breath. He had completed his 40 hours of training the previous week, covering unconscious bias, de-escalation, ECOA, CRA compliance. However, e-learning was one aspect. Confronting a live customer was entirely another. 8:06 Antimeridiem. A Mexican-American woman approached the counter, placing a withdrawal slip for $18,000. Aiden offered a smile, initiating his standard greeting. "How may I assist you today?" Everything proceeded smoothly until he faltered. "That is a rather substantial amount for a customer with this particular account type." He had not even finished speaking before a yellow light illuminated in the corner of his screen. Level 1 flag, language pattern, comparative framing, plus this type of account. Risk of bias, pause and contact supervisor. The mandatory 60-second pause countdown commenced. Supervisor Mary Coleman hurried over. "I will handle this from here, ma'am. We apologize for the phrasing. I will process this withdrawal for you immediately. If you prefer, I can prepare fresh hundreds for your transaction." The withdrawal was successfully completed in 4 minutes. The dashboard marked the incident as resolved, transmitting the anonymized audio clip to the Ombudsman's office. 9:20, Antimeridiem, Remote Operations Room. Jerome Brooks was examining the heat map of the 25 pilot branches. Houston's yellow flag had turned green, annotated with supervisor intervention plus apology plus successful completion. A coaching note was sent to Dr. J. Angela Davis, who opened a ticket. No disciplinary action. Schedule one-on-one follow-up training for Aiden. Include revised script. I will process your withdrawal promptly. If you have a preferred denomination, I can prepare it for you. 10:30 Antimeridiem, Dallas Training Room. Olivia Reed from Human Resources stood before a class of new hires. Yesterday, we observed 3 Level 1 flags and 0 Level 2 flags. All 3 incidents were resolved with a proper apology and the transaction completed in under 5 minutes. That constitutes a successful outcome. Maya Adams positioned her camera to the side, filming an internal video segment titled "A Day with the Justice Meter." She conducted a brief interview with Aiden. "How did you feel when the flag appeared?" Aiden exhaled, responding honestly. "I felt panicked, but it prevented me from saying something far worse." That afternoon in New Jersey, a senior teller expressed dissent. "I feel as though I am constantly being monitored." Jerome responded calmly via Zoom. "This tool is designed to protect both the customer and you. When a flag is raised, the pause mechanism prevents you from facing potential litigation over a single misplaced remark. We are aiming to de-escalate situations, not to stifle communication." He shared the 90-day metrics. Training completion, 72%. Average score, 4.35. AI monitoring is operational across 25 pilot branches. The rate of false positives stood at 9.4%. Complaints related to bias were down 17% from a 6-month benchmark. Customer satisfaction, measured by Net Promoter Score at pilot locations, increased by 11 points. The Ombudsman's first quarter bulletin was published online, focusing on inclusion and accountability. There were 2 Level 1 incidents, 0 Level 2, and 0 Level 3. Policy adjustments included removing the purpose of withdrawal from standard forms and standardizing an apology script. Frontline staff were granted the authority to pause transactions if bias was suspected. The $25 million community fund initiated its first round, with $8.2 million already allocated. In Detroit, Marcus Green's auto repair shop secured a $150,000 low-interest loan, accompanied by cash flow management guidance. This enabled him to hire 4 additional mechanics. In Oakland, a food cooperative founded by a black woman received $400,000. Its credit education program attracted 120 local residents. Maya produced a 5-minute segment featuring recipients sharing their experiences, emphasizing authenticity over corporate polish. Resistance did emerge. An anonymous email alleged, "The AI is eavesdropping." Mark Ellis from the legal department and the chief technology officer responded publicly, clarifying that audio is anonymized, stored with audit trail controls, and utilized solely for pattern analysis, with no personal content beyond the transaction scope being processed, ensuring full compliance with state and federal laws. Dr. Syokot Davis added, "We have an independent data ethics committee. This is discussed during our quarterly investor calls." Linda Price, the chief financial officer, reported, "Deployment expenses are within budget. Environmental, social, and governance ESG funds that hold our stock will see their weighting increase if next 90-day key performance indicators are achieved. A fund manager inquired, what if false positives do not decrease to 5% within 180 days? Linda explained, we have a tuning roadmap, regional phrase dictionaries, and adaptive thresholds to prevent overwhelming the frontline staff. Later that evening, in a small conference room, Sterling reviewed the whiteboard. The plan is effective, but we must not become complacent. Keisha agreed. The real metric isn't how many presentations we give, it's how infrequently Maya's camera needs to be activated. The room fell silent. The weight of that statement resonated more profoundly than any data chart. From the analytical perspective, the 90-day review confirmed 3 crucial points. Artificial intelligence does not replace human empathy, but rather prevents individuals from reverting to detrimental habits by enabling pauses and facilitating timely assistance. Transparency serves as the organization's immune system, evident in quarterly bulletins, public KPIs, and data feedback mechanisms. Aligned incentives ensure that change is sustainable. The implemented tool reduces legal exposure for employees, streamlines customer interactions, and stabilizes capital for investors. When Maya's Justice Meter video was released, the most impactful comment wasn't about the bank's performance. It was a simple statement. Today, I withdrew money in 3 minutes. No one questioned my reasons. This was the benchmark Keisha had aimed for, a transition from disruptive noise to ordinary quiet. In Washington, D.C., at 10 o'clock in the morning, the House Financial Services Committee commenced its hearing on economic justice within financial services. Keisha Thompson occupied the central position at the witness table, with Jerome Brooks seated to her left and Dr. Angela Davis to her right. Amidst the glare of cameras, microphones, and bright lights, the audience wasn't seeking apologies, they were seeking actionable strategies. Keisha began, outlining 3 primary levers: legislation, capital, and data. When the repercussions for biased behavior are sufficiently significant, behavioral changes occur rapidly. However, for these changes to be legally sound, ethically aligned, and practically effective, we require transparent metrics, autonomous authority for the ombudsman, and the capacity to halt transactions upon detecting suspicious activity. She then presented the 6-month figures. 96% of frontline staff had completed training, achieving an average score of 4.65. The AI system's full rollout resulted in a false positive rate of 4.8%, targeting 8%, with bias complaints decreasing by 33% from the baseline across the company. Net Promoter Score had risen by 18 points in regions historically experiencing high complaint volumes. The Community Fund had disbursed $9.19 million, representing 36% of the annual plan, with an on-time repayment rate of 98%. Jerome detailed a case study from the Phoenix branch where a teller utilized the phrase, "for accounts like yours," triggering a Level 2 flag due to a previous discrimination report by the customer. We paused the transaction, escalated it to a supervisor, offered an apology, and completed the process immediately. The ombudsman followed up within 24 hours, and the customer rated the experience 5 out of 5, sending a thank you email. He concluded, "The right to pause transactions due to suspected bias does not impede the bank's operations. Instead, it saves time by circumventing protracted arguments." A representative posed a question. Could AI inadvertently amplify bias if the underlying data is flawed? Dr. Davis responded, "We do not employ AI to make judgments about individuals, but solely to identify potentially problematic language. The dataset has been deliberately constructed. It does not learn from past complaints by classifying them as true or false labels. It only learns sentence patterns identified by legal professionals and linguists. Our Independent Data Ethics Committee conducts quarterly audits and publishes the error rates." That same afternoon in Boston, Harvard Business School hosted a case study titled "Thompson Standards: When Markets Punish Bias." Kesha informed the students, "My objective is not to cause anyone to lose their job, but to establish a system where unethical behavior incurs significant costs." A student inquired, "Can other banks replicate this without genuine intent?" Kesha emphasized the necessity of verifiable KPIs and independent reporting. "The media will ensure the rest." On Wall Street that evening, Linda Price addressed investor inquiries. "We have successfully met our 180-day KPIs. Major ESG funds have issued commitments to maintain their holdings. 2 funds have marginally increased their positions. Rating agencies have acknowledged our governance improvements." A fund manager asked, "What about next year? What happens when the spotlight fades and practices revert to the old ways?" Linda reassured him, "Our KPIs are directly linked to executive bonuses. The Ombudsman reports directly to the board. Quarterly bulletins are publicly accessible. Any regression will be more costly than continued progress." Late that night, in a modest meeting room, Brad Mitchell was engaged with an online training module for a credit union that had hired him, contingent upon his completion of bias reduction training. The video opened with Maya Adams lecturing on harmful language. Brad paused at a frame showing Jerome Brooks testifying at the hearing, swallowing audibly. Following the course, he was scheduled to address a community college audience about the repercussions of a seemingly minor facial expression. Dr. Davis and her team reviewed a new form, omitting the monthly income field from withdrawal transactions as irrelevant and incorporating a preferred form of address field, "Sir, ma'am, other," to reduce misidentification errors. The first complex case concluded with a formal reprimand for a supervisor who had disregarded AI flags on 3 separate occasions. This disciplinary action was published anonymously in the quarterly bulletin, intended as a learning opportunity rather than public shaming. Maya was filming behind-the-scenes footage for Owning Justice, a documentary in production. She focused not on emotional displays, but on whiteboards detailing KPIs, customer appreciation emails following interventions, and dashboards transitioning from red to green within 60 seconds. Her narration stated, "Justice is not always overtly expressed. At times it manifests as a deliberate pause." In Brussels, during a virtual meeting with the European Union, a commissioner inquired of Kesha, "Can this model be implemented in countries with stringent data privacy regulations?" Kesha explained, "We do not store voice data linked to personal identities. Instead, we retain risk scores and action logs. Individual countries can establish their own thresholds, provided they uphold the pause for bias authority and the independence of the Ombudsman." The commissioners nodded, requesting a technical guidance document. At First National, Olivia presented the training progress map. 34 branches, 96% completion, with the remaining 4% on extended leave or recently hired. "We have transformed cultural expectations into defined job requirements," she stated. Janet Risk added, "Complaint rates at the 10 former high-issue branches are now consistent with the system average." From the analytical tier, the 6-month mark solidified the feedback loop. The institutional framework, the independent ombudsman, the pause for bias flags, and the public KPIs proved more influential than mere moral exhortations. The narrative shifted from generalized inspiration to concrete operational procedures, from standardized apologies to advanced language detection APIs. Market incentives rewarded correct behavior and penalized deviations, rendering a return to outdated practices economically illogical. Later that evening, Kesha departed from headquarters, pausing in the grand marble lobby where their initiative had begun. Sunlight glinted off the surfaces, and distant footsteps echoed. There was no triumphant smile. Instead, she mentally tallied the accomplishments. A system that could pause transactions when necessary. One staff member retrained, one customer who avoided a public incident. The following day, she was scheduled to fly to Boston to address students. The subsequent week, Congress would invite her as an unpaid advisor for an industry guidance bill. The following month, the Regional Bank Alliance would seek a license to adopt the Thompson standards. At the end of the hall, Jerome waited for the elevator, holding a stack of files. He looked up. 6 months. Kesha nodded. And the most significant achievement today was having nothing noteworthy to live stream. The elevator doors closed, signaling the commencement of the next year when the bank's success story would extend to an entire industry. The upcoming challenges would be more demanding, but the course for improvement had been established. At the Global Banking Equality Summit in New York, from 10 a.m. to noon, the venue was filled to capacity. A backdrop prominently displayed 3 concise words: law, capital, data. Kesha Thompson stepped to the podium, beginning not with an elaborate introduction, but with a direct statement. Dignity is non-negotiable. On the screen behind her, 4 key metrics appeared, reflecting 1 year of progress in institutions adopting the Thompson standards. A 52% decrease in discrimination complaints, a 34% increase in minority business lending across the industry, a 97% frontline training completion rate, an AI monitoring score of 4.65, and a median intervention time of 63 seconds, with false positives at 4.7%. Federal agencies like the Federal Reserve and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency had issued guidance recommending the independent ombudsman model and the pause for bias authority as a best practice. Several states were considering legislation to mandate public disclosure of KPIs within licensing regulations. First National Bank, FNC, had not only recovered financially, but had also reached a new peak share price following a year of implementation, with governance risk reports indicating a substantial structural transformation. During a panel discussion, a regional bank CEO questioned the 1-year cost of implementing the system, asking, "How can smaller banks afford this?" Linda Price, FNC's CFO, provided a straightforward answer. "We are launching a shared service option, offering AI as a service, along with licensed training alliances for ombudsmen. These economies of scale will make the per-unit cost feasible for smaller institutions." HISAC. Angela Davis added, "The fundamental components are not prohibitively expensive. Pause for bias authority, quarterly bulletins, and independent investigations." A delegate pressed further. Could the AI itself be biased? Jerome Brooks presented the audit findings. The training data was exclusively comprised of risky phrasing patterns identified by attorneys and linguists. Past complaints were never used as definitive true or false labels. Quarterly audits are conducted by an independent data ethics committee, and intervention logs are published anonymously in the Ombudsman's Bulletin. In the lobby, the Thompson Financial Group Equality Fund booth showcased $110,000 dispersed over 12 months, facilitating the creation of 8,400 jobs. Marcus Green from Detroit was present at a small table, displaying a photograph of his expanded auto shop with 3 apprentices proudly holding safety certificates. "They didn't just provide affordable capital," Marcus told a reporter. "They also taught me how to manage cash flow effectively." The week prior, at the Cannes Film Festival, Maya Adams's documentary, Owning Justice, A Banking Revolution, received the Palme d'Or for documentaries. Maya herself played a minimal role in the film. Instead, viewers witnessed dashboards changing color, standardized apology scripts, and customer thank you emails. Upon accepting the award, she simply stated, "A smartphone can initiate the process, but a new institution must complete it." Brad Mitchell was in a community college classroom in Cleveland, explaining the significant cost associated with a seemingly minor gesture. In his new role at a credit union, he participated in the My Mistake, Our Lesson program, not to conceal past errors, but to openly discuss their financial impact, a lost job, a lasting consequence, and the gradual rebuilding of customer trust. In the hospitality sector, a 12-brand hotel chain signed an agreement to implement a stop bias trigger. When staff used stereotypical language, the system would alert the shift manager to assign a different employee to the interaction. A non-profit hospital in Minneapolis piloted the Pause for Bias system at patient intake. The AI did not record patient illnesses or ethnicity. It exclusively flagged phrases such as, "with your insurance." 6 months into the pilot, intake times decreased and complaints dropped significantly. During an EU webinar in Brussels, a commissioner inquired about GDPR compliance. Keisha outlined the system's architecture: risk scores detached from individual identities, anonymized audio recordings, minimal audit trail storage, and region-specific thresholds. What remains non-negotiable, she emphasized, is the Ombudsman's independence and the obligation for quarterly public reporting. At First National, there was a singular instance of non-compliance. A branch supervisor ignored AI flags 3 times within a single busy week. This triggered a Level 3 alert, prompting Ombudsman intervention. The outcome was an anonymized public reprimand published in the quarterly bulletin and mandatory retraining for the entire shift. This was not a scandal, but rather a timely application of preventative measures, effectively neutralizing a potential crisis in its nascent stage. During an end-of-day open question-and-answer session, an economics student asked, "What prevents the model from reverting to old practices once public scrutiny diminishes?" Kesha responded, "A closed-loop system, public KPIs linked to executive bonuses, investor oversight, and an empowered ombudsman. When backsliding becomes more costly than continuing progress, advancement naturally becomes the path of least resistance." From the analytical perspective, the first year yielded 3 lasting outcomes. The institutionalization of the Pause for Bias protocol as a practical operational skill rather than a matter of personal sensitivity. The successful cross-sectoral migration of the model to banking, hospitality, and healthcare, and a dynamic interplay of market forces acting as soft regulation, with guidance interlocking and capital setting the price while data dictated the pace. In the evening, Kesha stood by the glass doors of the hotel lobby, observing the avenue below. A message from Jerome appeared on her phone. "Tomorrow, I'm speaking in Detroit to a group of new tellers. I'll describe the 60-second pause as a form of protection." Kesha replied, "Include the concluding thought. No one should have to resort to live streaming to be treated with respect." It was Friday noon in the marble lobby of First National. The stone still gleamed, and the lights cast a warm glow. At counter number 2, a black teenager, accompanied by his mother and dressed in a school uniform, approached the teller. "I need to withdraw $1,200 from my summer savings account," he stated, a hint of nervousness in his voice. The teller smiled reassuringly. "Certainly. How would you prefer the bills?" His posture visibly relaxed. No one raised a phone to record. This was the definitive metric. Above, a small screen briefly flashed a green indicator. No risk pattern detected. Jerome Brooks, conducting a surprise walkthrough that day, observed from a distance, noting the correct script delivery, appropriate pacing, and the absence of unnecessary documentation requests. He left the lobby with a sense of completion, as if a full circle had been drawn. On the 12th floor boardroom, Robert Sterling presented the Year 1 summary to the board and fund representatives. The presentation, a concise slide deck, covered met and unmet KPIs, key challenges, and critical bottlenecks. "We have successfully reduced internal complaints by 33%. Industry Alliance reports indicate a 52% adoption rate. False positives have been reduced to 4.7%. The Community Fund has disbursed 36% of its allocated capital, with a 98% repayment rate." Challenges persist, with some supervisors still expressing unease regarding the Pause authority, and a few branches experiencing staffing shortages during peak hours. He concluded, "The initial cost of establishing our processes on day 1 has now become integrated into our everyday operational architecture." Maya Adams, seated at the end of the table with her camera switched off, opened her notebook, filled with a list of stories she had not needed to document. A Somali man in Minneapolis withdrew funds for car repairs in 5 minutes. A Cuban grandmother in Tampa opened a certificate of deposit without inquiry about her son's income. These were short, understated anecdotes, akin to haiku, yet imbued with the essence of transformative change. Kesha presented a single page illustrating a diffusion map. A Midwest regional bank had recently requested a license for the Thompson standards, encompassing training, the AI Alliance, the Ombudsman function, and public KPIs. The Hotel Alliance had signed a charter to incorporate the Pause for Bias protocol into their operational manual. The Hospital Association was piloting new greeting protocols and language detection. "This is not merely a brand," Keisha stated. "It is a protocol." Mark Ellis, legal, provided an update. The House Financial Services Committee was drafting guidance influenced by their KPIs, and California was considering legislation to mandate ombudsman bulletins for banks with assets exceeding $10 billion. "The signals are aligned," he noted. Linda, the CFO, added, "We have linked executive bonuses to long-term KPIs. If performance falls below the established threshold, bonuses will be reduced by 30 to 50%, providing a strong incentive to maintain our course." In a corner of the room, the Ombudsman's fourth-quarter bulletin was ready for printing. It detailed 8 Level 1 flags, 1 Level 2, and 0 Level 3 incidents. 2 policy changes were noted: the removal of the source of funds field for routine withdrawals and the addition of alternative scripts tailored for the Midwest region. The bulletin also recorded a formal reprimand issued to a manager who intentionally disregarded a flag, documented as a pedagogical example rather than public shaming. During the afternoon graduation ceremony for new tellers in Detroit, Jerome spoke. "You wear the bank's emblem on your uniform, and in your hands, you hold the pause button. Utilize it as a commitment." The applause was not thunderous, but it was steady. Down below, Aiden Ross from Houston texted his trainer. "That flag the other day prevented me from making a significant mistake. Thanks for those 60 seconds. Late that evening, Maya visited her studio and looked at the Owning Justice poster on the wall. In the corner, in small print, it read, "A smartphone can start it. An institution must finish it." She opened an offer to teach part-time at a journalism school with the proposed course title, Transparency Through Architecture. She sketched a syllabus point. Publish more data, tell less. Brad Mitchell concluded a presentation at a community college. A student asked, "Would you resent the AI for catching you if you were still at your previous bank?" Brad sighed. "I wish I'd had a pause button that day. It might have saved me from my own ingrained habits." No excuses, no drama, just a straightforward account of reality. In the epilogue, set in the marble lobby, a middle-aged customer entered, glanced around, and murmured to his wife, "It feels normal." From the perspective of a security camera, normalcy was the ultimate objective. There was no crowd, no blaring public address system, no reporters. A process once weaponized had been transformed into a safeguard. Transparency, initially a spotlight, had become ambient light. From the analytical tier, 10 key elements of the narrative distilled into 5 actionable principles. Institutional bias often masquerades as standard procedure. The solution involves re-engineering procedures with built-in pause points, independent oversight, and public metrics. Economic justice complements, rather than replaces, legal justice by making detrimental behavior financially burdensome. AI functions most effectively as an alert system, not a judgmental entity. Key performance indicators, coupled with executive bonuses, effectively convert ethical considerations into contractual obligations. The most impactful stories are those that never unfold, such as a customer who doesn't need to live stream their experience. As Keisha departed the building for home, her phone buzzed with a text from a hotel chain CEO. "We finalized the license on Monday. The pause button will be implemented. Kesha replied with 3 words: verify, publish, repeat. She then put her phone away, gazing out at the evening street. Somewhere, a customer was about to enter another lobby, present a card, and utter an ordinary phrase, allowing normalcy to persist. No cameras, no social media outcry. The narrative, which began with a verbal transgression in a marble hall, concluded with a moment of deliberate pause. That was sufficient. It represented the progression from a single instance of public embarrassment to a widespread industry reform, where procedures no longer served as justifications for prejudice but as instruments for safeguarding every customer's dignity. And you, have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination at a bank or in a public space? How would you like those institutions to evolve? Share your experiences in the comments so we can engage in a collective discussion. If you found this narrative impactful, please consider liking, sharing to broaden its reach, and subscribing to the channel to stay informed about future stories concerning justice, dignity, and the collective power of change.